Hey everyone, good morning.
Morning.
Please silence your cell phones or notifications that might be distracting. Just be present, get comfortable. It's just an hour. We anticipate time at the end for questions and answers. We also will have contact information available. If we don't get to all the questions, we encourage you to ask. My name is Hannah. My pronouns are she, they.
And my name is Miha. I go by they, their, or two-spirit as a pronoun.
Cool. Well, before we get started, please text this phone number with your residential address and see which lands you occupy while you're at work, your apartment, your house, and maybe even your favorite restaurant or cafe. A lot of folks are from different places, potentially. We ran into this a lot, especially when we were doing virtual trainings. And it's important to honor the original and current peoples occupying land and space, which in some cases are the same people. Indigenous people are still here, living on our homelands. In Missoula, Montana, it's the territory of the Blackfeet, Salish, Kootenai, and Pend Oreille tribes. The point is, most of us are guests, and it's important to have gratitude and express cultural humility. It's like when you go to a friend's house and you thank them for having you in their home. Sometimes you can bring a gift, you can donate to a cause, or even buy a meal. Think about what some Indigenous languages are in the territory that you work at. I've had the opportunity to learn Pakani, my family's traditional language, over the past few years, and that's been really healing and really nice. This website also has an app. And if you see a name that you don't recognize, it's likely because they use the name of the tribe using those people's languages and not colonized languages like English or French.
Spanish.
And Spanish, and the list goes on. Land back is the truest and most legit acknowledgement, and we just feel like we need to say that when we give this slide. But Miha?
Yeah, awesome. Who's TransVisible? Hello and welcome. TransVisible Montana is a coalition of transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit Montanans, individuals, organizations, and allies. We uplift the lives and celebrate the lived experiences of transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit people. We do leadership programming, and we also do public education like this. We developed in 2017 during the legislative session. There was going to be a bunch of anti-trans bathroom bills, and we kind of had to scurry to make sure that those things didn't hit the floor. And so we did a lot of deep canvassing across the state, and we found out when people actually meet us and talk to us and see who these scary transgender or non-binary or two-spirit people are, they're less likely to be in favor of legislation that's really awful. So rather than do that every legislative session and be super reactive and try and make sure that stuff doesn't happen, we wanted to do year-round education and speakings, and then really help uplift each other's lives so that we could have the leadership skills we need to make sure these things aren't happening in our communities and to be good members of our communities. So we want to be more preventative than reactive. We're led by a table of statewide organizations and community representatives. These are just some of them. Sometimes there's ebb and flow of organizations who can have membership. But what's really worth noting here is that these organizations give typically about 5 hours a week to at least one of their employees to do work for TransVisible Montana. So they're making financial contributions with their employees to help do this work. And then we also have table members who are transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit people who aren't representing an org, but are representing our communities. Yeah, okay. We're gonna set some nice container here really quick. We're gonna do some space agreements, confidentiality, of course. You're all probably familiar with that. We're also not here to debate or argue with you right now. Like, we're not gonna debate whether like trans lives are valid or if we belong or whatever we do. And yeah, we're just here to like talk to you all and have you listen and learn a little bit. We do want you to share the air though, and you know, when we get to Q&A time, like try not to take up too much of that space. Speak from your own experience, not outing someone's story. Like you don't need to, if you want to talk about maybe a neighbor or someone in your community, like not using their name is what the ask is. If you make a mistake, just apologize, say, oops, you know, my bad, or thank you, or just make a correction and continue on. Raise your hand to make questions or comments, and then also challenge yourself, right? We ask that we create this brave space versus a safe space, because safety is not the same for everyone. So I can't be like, this is a safe space to ask all your questions, but I can be like brave and say like, you can ask me some questions, and like it might be uncomfortable, but I'm gonna do what I can to help us work together. Do folks have anything else that they would add to this or want to put in here? Yeah, something Hannah and I, we were talking about, especially folks, y'all who are working in like speech and hearing therapy stuff, like I'm sure you have heard people get asked inappropriate questions about those things all the time. And much like that, I mean, it's not the same, but much like that, as transgender, non-binary, two-spirit people, we often get asked really inappropriate questions. So I would just ask you, when you are asking questions during Q&A time, to keep that in mind. Like, is this really something I want to ask a stranger? Is this really an appropriate question that I need to know? Can I go home and Google this? Or like, maybe should I ask a friend who's of that experience? Yeah, because this is supposed to be educational, but we are not a petting zoo, so.
Cool, thanks. So pronouns are used when we're talking about someone. It's super important to use the pronoun someone goes by, even if they're there or not with you at that moment. For me, it's even more important for when I'm not around, because it means someone's honoring who we are, and I know Miha feels the same way. You may have noticed during the introduction that I introduce myself with the pronouns I go by, and the reason I do this, as many others do, is because you can't assume like what someone's pronouns are, and a lot of people make assumptions like every day about each other.
Yeah, you can't tell just by looking at someone.
Right, and you can't just tell by looking at someone, right? And so the reality is we all hold space inside ourselves for invisible identities, and these things we can be viewed as like positive or negative, and our pronouns are one of those invisible identities. We've been socialized to believe certain things, so like boy equals short hair, girl equals long hair, that sort of things, but we know that these things are not absolute truths, and that they can be culturally inaccurate. So for example, Indigenous people sometimes have a connection to hair and have longer hair, no matter the gender.
Can you all think of any other examples where like we've been raised to believe these things as absolute truths, but we're like, actually, go ahead and just fire those out. Only girls wear makeup. Jewelry is only for women. I didn't hear that, but yes.
Dresses are for girls.
Oh yeah, dresses are only for girls.
Pokemon is just for boys is one I heard a lot when I was young.
I never heard that one.
I heard it a lot.
You know,
Our school was different, man.
yeah. Trucks. Yeah. Yes.
Men
Did you hear that?
Men can't cry. is
Men
what
can't
someone
cry,
said.
yeah, or shouldn't. It's shameful if they do, yeah. Yeah, so we already know that there are a lot of things out there that we're told that are true that aren't.
Yeah, and a lot of those things are harmful and end up hurting the other person. And ultimately, when we uplift those like societal myths, then we hurt, people in society. So, yeah.
Cool. So we are going to practice our pronouns. We're going to have you turn to a neighbor and say your name, what your pronoun is. Some examples are he, or she, or they, or z. Use which one's good for you. Also, just to note that if you don't have a preference for what people call you, just say that I don't have a preference instead of saying like I don't care or I am human, because that really just sort of like diminishes like the point of having a pronoun, which is to be respectful and to tell somebody how you like to be called and referred to. So we're gonna have you say your name, your pronoun to your neighbor, and let them know why you're attending this workshop. And then we'll come back in very shortly, like 2 minutes.
If you all are online, feel free to say your name and your pronoun in the chat.
Yeah, and if you couldn't hear Hannah in the chat, if you're online, go ahead and say your name, your pronouns, why you're here for the workshop. Maybe even put your the territory you're occupying in there as well. Okay, finish up with your neighbor. So raise your hand if that was your first time introducing yourself with your pronoun. All right, congratulations. It will not be your last. So keep practicing, get familiar. Sometimes it can feel silly or uncomfortable, but the point is that pronouns are validating. And it's a really great way to show somebody that you respect who they are and just to help somebody be more at ease. And especially when you're in a teaching position, right, or a therapy position, like you want people to feel good and to be able to access your services. If you ever mess up, make the correction and move on. When you go on and on at length in your apology about like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I've been working on this, or I tried so hard, then you're actually making it about you. It's no longer about, like, oh, oops, I messed up. Think about it like when you say your friend's wrong name or you call your kid the wrong kid's name. You're just like, James, sorry. Actually, I just said sorry, and that's, I'm taught to say that, right? But when you tell people, oh, I'm sorry, then people tend to feel obligated to be like, oh, it's okay. So try not to say you're sorry when making a mistake about somebody's pronouns, because then they tend to be like, oh, no, it's okay, and it's actually not okay. You can just be like, my bad, and make a correction and move on. There's a hand in the back. It is appropriate to ask somebody their pronouns, and some people will say like, oh, no, it's not, because then you're like outing somebody, but actually it's that person's choice to tell you what their pronoun is, right? They don't have to tell you the pronoun that maybe they've been thinking about going by if they don't want to. When you ask somebody their pronoun, you're asking somebody, how they can respect you, right? So I don't need to like come out about anything I don't want. I'm just telling how somebody can refer to me as a way of respect. When I was talking to you about not dismissing the like pronoun thing by like being like, I don't care or I'm human, a friend of mine likes to say, I go by all the pronouns with a positive intention. So they're like, I don't mind what you call me as long as you're being respectful about it, right? Like, so yes, it is totally appropriate to ask somebody's pronouns. When you're just making guesses, you could be wrong, and that could be, could dissolve a friendship that could have been. It could be then that person doesn't want to like pay attention to you anymore, or then they feel aggression about it, like they don't feel like they belong in a space. So just remember that pronouns are things to use to replace nouns. So they can be anything that person who identifies with them wants to be. And so the point is, everyone has pronouns. I was on a Zoom call the other day, and they asked the presenters to put their pronouns in their name badge or whatever, and this one person just put like, it, human. And I sent them a message afterwards, and I was like, I really hope that person actually, those are their pronouns, because I missed the beginning, or that somebody talks to that person, because it felt really rude to sit and stare at that like all day, and just like have somebody be like making a joke or a mockery of like people just asking for some general respect about themselves. So when you did the exercise, or the introduction, was it a little awkward, or like how did folks feel about it? Good? You're like, I'm just meeting people today? Awesome, great. Some people feel a little challenged or uncomfortable with that. Yeah, you want to go ahead?
Cool. So on the left here, this is a genderbread person who's by Sam Killerman. And the text on the right is from Gender Unicorn, which is teaser and the trans student educational resources. And we took pieces from each that we liked. The first time I personally learned about gender and attraction and sex and expression and identity, it was with the genderbread person. So in order to understand gender, we need to deconstruct a few of the things that are often confused as being the same or related to. So gender is different from anatomy, and anatomy is not gender. Sexuality is separate from those two, and none of these things have anything to do with like being a predator. These differences are important, especially when considering legislation like the bathroom bills we were talking about. People can talk about these things existing on a spectrum, but in reality, it can vary depending on each personal or cultural relationship to someone's identity. Gender is a universe, and we're all stars. And it's important to note that people change. We all change our hairstyles, our hair colors, the sort of clothes we wear to represent like ourselves, our favorite foods, our favorite activities, who we're attracted to, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's all part of like learning and growing. Imagine asking a butterfly to stay a caterpillar their whole life, or telling babies not to grow. Change is a part of who we are, and it's different for everyone.
True. And part of why we bring this up, I mean, Hannah mentioned this a little bit, but oftentimes people will lump up transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit folks in with like being queer or like just LGB, and they're actually different. There are reasons that we are in, excuse me, in that together, but they have nothing to do with sexuality. You know, like some trans people are queer, but not all of them are. So it's just really important because we're often lumped in. And part of why we have TransVisible Montana is because we're so lumped in like LGB stuff or queer community stuff, but we're actually quite marginalized even within the like gay or queer communities. So we wanted something very specific for us, and like if you follow any of our social media, you'll notice we don't just post any old LGB post. It's all very trans specific. So history and science reminds us and tells us over and over that there are more than two genders and more than two sexes. We know that two-spirit and other gender variant people have existed always on this continent and on other ones. We know that XX and XY are not the only biological combinations or factors in determining gender or sex. And we have a really good resource list with links that we can offer you that talk a little bit more about that, you know, in that scientific-y way that I'm not well-spoken. We know that although social constructs can be tempting to believe as biological, they're in reality built and maintained by systems of power and control. I think a lot of folks understand this as when people are identify as women and the way that they are treated. Like this, it's an invisible limitation set upon people, right? Prioritizing a two-gender binary system insists that there are only two genders. It is harmful, and it often promotes a gender hierarchy in which women and non-binary individuals are viewed as subordinate to men. A gender binary system reinforces stereotypes that harm everyone in society and limits who we're allowed to be. And when we understand gender in terms of a spectrum or a genderverse, as I like to call it, we can challenge harmful stereotypes and better reflect the full nature of the human experience. And like Hannah said, gender is a universe, and we're all stars, and that means that every single one of us has a place. Like maybe my cluster is closer to someone else's cluster, and we have similar identities in the way that we present ourselves or talk, and maybe yours is over here, right? But it doesn't matter. We're all like in it. We're all in it to win it. So, yeah. Did I skip a slide? Okay.
I'm going to quickly define some terms that you may be curious about, but please note, terms come about because people find a place of comfort within them, but not everyone wants to put a label on themselves or has found a label to put on themselves, and it's important to not give people labels so that they can find that for themselves if they so choose. So
people can label themselves, but you don't get to label other people.
Yeah.
Put on your own label.
Yep. So transgender or trans is like an umbrella term for people whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does not conform to the sex in which they were assigned at birth. Gender binary is the dominant idea that there are only two genders, the way they identify or are told to behave, and it's linked to only two sexes, so the physical characteristics of our bodies, male and female. Cisgender or cis is a term for people whose gender identity matches the sex that they were assigned at birth. It's the opposite of the term transgender. And related terms include cis sexism or cis normativity.
So those are the assumptions that everyone in the room is cisgender or everybody, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes you'll hear those on occasion. And did you notice when I said that, whole thing that I used the singular use of they, which is done all the time.
Yeah, a lot of people get really uptight about they pronouns, and they're it's grammatically incorrect, or you can't be a they, but it's actually really, it's older than the singular you, the singular they. So we try and point out when singular use they is in things.
I think that we'll end up coming across someone who has an issue with they in grammar, and it doesn't make much sense. So non-binary, agender, or genderqueer is someone who doesn't conform within a gender binary, and some people can use gender nonconforming, and there are other names. Google is your friend. Two-spirit is a contemporary term used to describe Indigenous people who assume cross or multiple gender roles, attributes, dress, and attitudes for personal, spiritual, and cultural, ceremonial, or social reasons. These roles are defined by each cultural group and can be fluid over time. Some people use the word indigiqueer, or names for themselves in their own Indigenous language. And TransVisible Montana offers a Two-Spirit 101 class Just so you know.
If you want to learn more about that, be in touch.
Yeah, be in touch. And then gender fluid is someone whose gender or expression changes. I know Miha has a friend who is gender fluid, and you can kind of speak to that.
I mean, that's just like you don't really know what, like however they show up, however they show up. I just no assumptions about however, like wildly different one day to the next, and you know what, same awesome golden heart the whole time, so.
Yep.
So under this transbrella, you might notice that there are some things up above. We have intersex, drag performer, and cross-dresser. And I'm curious if folks understand or want to say why they might not be under the transbrella, why we put them outside. Kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. I'm just going to tell you. Oh, yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say someone could have any gender identity and be a drag performer. I'm not so sure about intersex. That's kind of
Yes, absolutely. So intersex folks, drag performers, and cross-dressers might identify as one of these things under the trans umbrella, but just because they are does not mean that they exist as transgender, non-binary, two-spirit. So an intersex person might be like, yes, I'm transgender, or yes, I am non-binary. But not every intersex person is going to be like that. Some will just identify a different way. Just because a drag performer is exactly that, a performer and an entertainer who's like experimenting with like expression, but might not necessarily identify as transgender. They might be gay or they might be straight and just doing drag, right? They also might identify as cisgender and that like identifying with the sex they were assigned at birth. They just like to play with expression a little bit for, entertainment. And same with crossdresser. And then we didn't define intersex on here, but intersex is a general term used for a variety of conditions in which a person is born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of female or male. Intersex is a socially constructed category that reflects real biological variation. And, intersex folks have been pathologized for a really long time and like said to be like abnormal or whatever, but in fact they are so much more common than people understand that the same amount of people, like the same percentage of people who are born with red hair it's the same percentage for intersex people. And there's a lot of really awful surgeries that are being performed on people who are born intersex. And it's not okay, and I will say that some of the legislation that came up this last session was very specific in not only targeting transgender folks, but intersex folks as well, because while they made it so that you have to have surgery in order to change the gender on your birth certificate, they also made it so that doctors can still keep performing these surgeries on intersex babies. So there's like a special condition to that legislation that actually really impacts intersex folks. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question about drag, or should I save it for the end?
Let's save it for the end. Let's see how far we got. I don't know why that's not sliding.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about being an ally now. So like, what can you do? Do believe someone when they tell you about their own identity and experience. Don't gaslight them about who they are. No one likes that. Don't make assumptions about identity or intentionally misgender someone. Ask, what are your pronouns? Introduce yourself with your pronouns. Extra credit to the person who had to ask that. Don't ask someone's like real name, their dead name. Messed up. Add your pronouns to email tags, name tags, and business cards. Do that. Educators can have students write pronouns in addition to their name. Don't ask or assume personal questions about genitalia, hormones or surgery. That's really creepy. Do interrupt misinformation and harmful language when you see it. Don't use words like tranny, she-male, he, she, lady, boy, thing, it. None of that. Do educate yourself, watch films for and about transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit people. Don't worry about who is in what bathrooms. We're all there for number one and number two. You know, just go in, do your business, wash your hands, get out. Do vote for policies that support transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit people. And don't host gender reveal parties. I've just seen them all kind of end in disaster over the last year. And I think that your house insurance might go up, something like that. Not sure how that works, but...
Also, fun fact about gender reveal parties, the first person who like sort of invented gender reveal parties had a child of theirs come out as transgender, so that kind of blew the top off their whole gender reveal party. And they are now saying like, I didn't understand it, I thought it'd be cute, it was a mistake, it's really marginalizing, and in some situations, explosive.
Yeah, kind of dangerous, to be honest.
It's like the bad kind of fire.
Find something else fun to do. You might feel tempted to show the world that you're in the know by using words like tranny or trans, but unless you're transgender, stick with saying transgender. Some folks who use these words pertain to some folks who use these words are reclaiming them, but they're not really to be used with someone who it does not apply or who is outside of that specific community. Yeah, so hosting gender reveal parties is a guess, like at best, and hosting one may be setting you and your child up for failure and disappointment. If you're in public and can't tell what gender someone is, like, don't worry about it. Don't ask about a stranger's genitals. Don't harass someone just trying to pee. That's really creepy. Please don't do that. That's a lot. Disclosure on Netflix is a super good movie about the harmful impacts Hollywood has had on transgender communities. And then we will, if you want other suggestions, just feel free to email us. Those contacts things will be at the end. Google and YouTube are your friend if your searches are made in good intent. Obviously, use your discretion. Some people on the internet do not wish people generally well. Some national orgs, though, have resources specifically for allies who are parents, who are partners, who are educators, family members, therapists, of people who are trans, non-binary, and two-spirit. So I would suggest those. Those are a good place to start. Yeah. So people are always asking me, how can I help the transgender community? And language is a great place to start, especially if you work in any sort of service industry, school, or public industry. Just like pronouns, we can make small adjustments in our everyday language, and it has a really deep impact on transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit communities. Not only that, but how we model our everyday language has very real impacts on youth and how they learn to treat each other. Like, think about young people and this whole like boy-girl like binary system where like young boys are like, you can't do that because you're a girl, you can't, right? So like right from the young age, the ability for limitations has been set a certain level, right? But if we are using inclusive language, then it doesn't create that system quite as easily. So the language that we use has very real impact. Consider these. Instead of guys, try folks. All of you folks are welcome in this space. Instead of men or women, try everyone. These cozy winter outfits can be worn by everyone. Instead of ladies and gentlemen, try distinguished guests. You know, like get creative
with your language. And once you start doing that, you really notice how much gendered language everything really is, like from songs to like how we communicate with each other. It just takes practice. It just takes switching it up. It's a lot easier the more you try. But if you are just totally willing to fall to the default of the binary language, then there's going to be limitations, not only for you, but for other people as well. What are some other ones folks have maybe used? Friends? Yeah, totally. Y'all. I love y'all. Some people don't like y'all, but I love y'all. I'm sure you're all great, but.
It's a little soon.
I like the word y'all, I guess. So there's so many. We just don't need to do this. This is actually like, especially when we're talking about ladies and gentlemen, we're defining there like who belongs where. Like there's the ladies and then there's the gentlemen, right? And who's on top of that, right? What was another one? When people are always like, we were taught like, people are like, oh, I'm from the South. We were taught to be polite. You have to be like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, sir, no, ma'am. But it's totally okay to just be like, no, thank you, or yes, please. Like, you don't have to attach this like, sir or ma'am. And whether you realize it or not, when we use those, we're inside of our head, the wheels are turning in like how we are respecting that person based on whether we say sir or ma'am, right? How we like view what they are able to do. Or how they get to show up in our lives.
Can I add, like in the schools, even saying like boys and girls line up, it might be better to say friends because of kids that may not.
Sure, or like,
Yeah.
Sure which group they belong to if they don't belong to either.
or just students. Students line up. Everybody line up. Beloved community line up.
Young Montanans.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, if anybody has an answer for this, but what if you're like making a chart note in the medical record? I mean, every medical record says, this is a 59-year-old female, or white female, or black male, or whatever. I mean, I don't know, is that information that critical to describe that person in a gender-based?
Not always. And that is like, those are the institutional changes we really, really, really need to be making. But unless any of you care about it, then it's not going to happen. Because until people start being like, hey, these forms need to change, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen if I don't come talk to you, and if you don't talk to the other people, and if like we don't ask for this very specific changes to happen, right? There's a lot of debate about, I don't know if it's about debate, but some states, I think there's over like 20 states right now are offering a gender X marker on their state-issued driver's license and IDs. Montana is not one of them. But at the same time, when we talk to first responders and stuff, why do we even have gender on our IDs in the first place? And a lot of times it's assumptions about those things that like can lead folks astray, right? This is why people believe that like transgender people are trying to trick you. Well, nobody's trying to fucking trick you. You're just making assumptions, like you're putting labels on people that they aren't giving themselves. And so like, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, like 100%. I am taking I personally am not a doctor, nor can be a nurse or anything else. I am still in college. But when I learned how to do mental status exams or something in a psychology course, it was always patient. And so I think that patient, and then obviously if it's something to do with someone's reproductive genitalia situation, then list it. But I think it would be really nice if people could say patient, and I think that would work. That's what I was taught.
Yeah, the other information's personal that you share with maybe your family and your physician. Nobody needs to know that stuff, and we don't need to know that stuff in order to respect people
Yeah.
or for people to have equal rights.
Cool. Well, yeah, I think that like patient, and then
Patient students,
that'd be cool.
get creative.
So why is this all important, folks? Because support matters. So 40% of trans folks attempt suicide within their lifetime, and these numbers could be inaccurate because this is only a statistic for attempted suicide and not necessarily a reflection of completed suicide. Even in death, trans folks are misgendered, and so information about suicide can be largely misinformed. Reasons for high suicide rates are primarily gender-based discrimination, harassment, bullying, abuse, lack of support from family and friends. And the National Transgender Discrimination Survey evidence shows that suicide rates jump to 57% when a trans person isn't supported by their families, and decrease when they are being supported. And I think that's something to really encourage families of the trans, non-binary, and two-spirit people in your life. And it's really something to keep in mind. It's important to reduce societal stigma because we're talking about people's lives, not only the quality, but if they're here or not, based on these statistics. And people who are accepted and supported are more productive members in society and are able to make quantifiable contributions. So safety, time after time again, it's been shown when all members of the community, any community we live in, whether that be a school space, a workspace, a town, a county, a state, when they're all supported and uplifted, communities are ultimately safer. Communities, additionally, when people feel safer in being who they are, they feel welcome and belonging and more authentic, and it adds diversity, warmth, and the richness that we all want in our lives. We all get to be more of who we want to be when people have access to their own liberation. I think we should really focus on that too, because you might not know how the societal norms and the gender binaries have affected you and are affecting you right now. Is there a chance you can't be who you want to be? Maybe not trans, non-binary, or two-spirit, but dress the way you want. Or maybe you've always been hesitant to have a hobby. It's ideal because then you get to be yourself and other people get to be themselves too.
Or have you ever said to yourself, oh, I really like that, but I could never pull that off. I could never pull that look off. Who's telling you that? Who is telling you that?
For real.
Or what is telling you that? What is informing your,
Right. And then there's really high rates of homelessness too, and I think this is an issue that spreads across Montana and that continues to rise. I know I'm from Great Falls, and it's rising similarly as in other communities, but there are high rates of homelessness in the transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit community. And it's important that we don't re-traumatize folks, because a lot of them have already experienced so much that we never want our community members to experience. And we need to prioritize the care of those folks. So
that's mostly what we have here. We really want to open it up for Q&A, and then also we have a table we're gonna with some resources. Some of you I saw already access that. Cool. But feel free to take anything off the table. We'll be around, hanging out, ask more questions. We'll be gone after that. But you can always find us online at transvisiblemontana.org. We have a Facebook, we have an Insta, we have a non-active Twitter. So reach out if you have more questions or if you want to bring us into your community. We can do this virtually, and we're feeling it out about the in-person. So be in touch with us.
Thanks for having us here, and thanks for like being brave in this space. We really appreciate it.
And remember that transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit people are not different than you. We're different like you. Because you're all different, right? Yeah. So we'll take some Q&A. How much time do we have? 10 minutes for some Q&A. Suicide prevention tips. There are a lot of resources online. There are groups you can join. I would say, like letting people live authentic lives is a great way to be preventative. Yeah, I would check out some online stuff for folks who specifically work in suicide. Yeah, in the back?
So we discussed saying no to gender.
Oh, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm gonna get back then so everyone can hear.
So we talked about not doing gender reveal parties. Is there appropriate language we should use for let's say infants or newborns, there's all that, it's a boy, kind of thing.
Yeah.
What considerations should we
I feel like that's I've seen a lot of parents do it different ways. I think you said it when you're it's an infant, it's a baby, we don't know, and their genitals aren't any of your business, and really letting young people choose for themselves. On our resource links page, we also have stories from parents who raised their children to be non-binary and then let their child gravitate towards whatever pronouns or clothing or toys or whatever that they wanted. And there's a lot of different stories that go a lot of different ways, right? We're all unique and different, have different experiences. I think, yeah, infant, baby, my child, kiddo, a little peanut, we already do things like that, yeah. Thank you. Another question?
So I'm from Burlington, Vermont, and my son, who's a teenager, was showing me on social media that the Burlington High School did this event during their homecoming where a bunch of people dressed up as trans. And I think the intent, I didn't see the whole posting, but I think the intent was just raise awareness to gender fluidity and non-traditional ways of gender expression or identity. And I think some teachers joined, and they did it during the homecoming football game, during the halftime.
Oh.
But I wonder how you feel about that, and I don't know if there were cisgender people also participating in this. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I got a lot of feelings on this. So I heard you say their intent was to be supportive, or maybe, right? But there's a big difference between intention and the impacts it has on actual people. And a lot of times, maybe these folks were trying to be supportive of their friend or whatever, but what ends up happening is that it becomes a joke, and trying on a different or opposite of your identity is, that's a costume for you. You're just playing. We're talking about people's actual identities. This isn't dress up or play pretend for transgender, non-binary, two-spirit people. It's not a joke. So even though it might be oh, we're doing this for you to support you. Well, did those people ask for that? For one. For two, does that mean you're interrupting all the misinformation or bad jokes that might be happening? And I think that I have a hard time with kind of spirit week things anyway, because I feel like it really reinforces a lot of things that I'm not here to talk about with you today. But it just becomes something else, and it becomes wildfires, out of control, and everybody always defaults on this oh, but their intention was to be supportive. I think when you want to do something to be supportive, you really need to think about what potential consequences could be. And you need to ask that community or those people first. Hey, we're thinking about doing this. Would that feel, would school feel safe for you if we did that? Instead of just assuming. It's, it's you keep doing something to somebody and they're oh, that hurts me. And you're no, I want you to feel good though. Why doesn't, So yeah, asking, I would say, would be a big thing.
Yeah, and I think it reminds me of like, we had like a Cowboys and Indian week, like not at my high school, but the other high school did, and I'm Indigenous, and it was like, my culture isn't your costume, and like this feels like really messed up, and it sort of reminds me of that. And it's also important to note that like transgender, non-binary, two-spirit is different than cross-dresser, and so I think it fell off the mark there, but you know, it fell off the mark, and it might have caused more harm than good.
Yeah, and it's not a joke, you know, like we said, these are people's actual like lives and transitions they're trying to go through. And for somebody who like maybe doesn't like pass as well, which is like when people like, if you can like tell that they are transitioning or like they don't fit these ideas of whatever, those are folks who are like more likely to be harassed and less accepted. And those are the folks who are struggling and need the most support. And like making something into a joke is just not helpful because it just perpetuates that. Like I have a friend, and she's a trans woman, and she absolutely hates Halloween because, you know, a lot of people, actually a lot of trans folks like cross-dress for Halloween and like decide, well, I felt so good that night. But a lot of people do it and it's a bunch of jokes and whatever. And then they also have Rocky Horror Picture Show. And my friend says that she gets called like a drag queen and all of these other things. People are more vocal to her about like, oh, I see you, trans person, than any other time of the year. When like, that's not anybody's place to be doing that. She's not a drag queen, you know, she's a woman. Like, why would you people just feel like they can make these comments to her. And really, we can't, we shouldn't. It's not right.
Does anyone have one more question? We might be able to squeeze in one more. Okay. I'm going to do one more.
Yeah, so I don't know if TransVisible or any other practicing clinicians might have advice for me, but I'm just a grad student. And so for some of my students, I'm using my supervisor's goals. And a lot of them are creating sentences with pronouns. And like, so showing a picture of an individual doing something and creating the sentence like, she is smelling a yellow flower, or something like that. And it's a lot for kids with autism, like it's a lot for their goals. So I don't know, it doesn't feel good being like, see, it's a girl because she has long hair, so you use the pronoun she. Mm-hmm. So do you think we should default to just like they are smelling a yellow flower, or maybe practicing asking for their pronouns, or like say like this person goes by the pronoun she, her, or like
all of that. Also, you could be like, this person is smelling a flower. You know, like there's just so many things we can do with that to make the small changes that really like change how people interact with each other. So yeah, I support you in that. Those are all the changes, right, that we need to be making, right? Yeah.
And feel free to email us if you need help with anything. Okay.
You know, and like putting like, instead of saying like preferred pronouns, it's not preferred, it's like people's pronouns. So just putting like pronouns on intake forms, a space, and then putting like your name and then like your legal name, right? If it's necessary. If it's not necessary, don't worry about it. Instead of like real name, right? So like name you want to be called, your legal name for our forms, and then tuck away that legal name. Don't get it in your head, because then you might mess it up, right? Like, I volunteered at a summer camp for LGBT youth, and a lot of the youth will fill out the forms with their parents before they come, and then as soon as they get to camp, they fill out a name tag with whatever they want on it, and it is usually different than the one that they filled out with their parents because they were too embarrassed or didn't think that they could, but once they get to camp, it changes. And I usually get like a medical slip that has everybody's legal names on it for their meds and whatever. And I just like tuck it away, you know, like I memorize the meds and I don't even look at those other names because I don't want to accidentally call them that, you know, when I'm calling my campers in. So, yeah, get in spaces.
Cool. Yeah, and feel free to email us. At this link, we have a really cool document that's full of like, we call it good links document. And it just goes more in depth about a lot of the issues that we touched on here, but also might have not. So if you're thinking like more links on healthcare or Two-Spirit Indigenous people
Parenting.
or sports or
Education. We also have a journalism and media guide, so folks can be reporting and writing about us in ways that are helpful.
yeah, and we've got lots of cool resources out there if you want to see me personally in a more relaxed position because presenting is scary. So awesome. Well, thank you.